We've got some news to touch on during this episode of Attacking Third. Pretty big. We got a coaching change to discuss. Spain has announced that they will be replacing women's national team coach Montse Tomé with Sonia Bermúdez. So a little bit of some big news for us to touch on here. It's a coaching change for the number one ranked team in the world just 2 weeks after reaching the final of the Women's Euro Championship. And so I think that's where we start when it comes to this news. So Montse out, Bermúdez in. There's some conversation to be had around, I think, Montse's eventual arrival to this head coaching position. She essentially got handed the reins to a team after a post 2023 World Cup victory by Spain, where there was unfortunately a lot of discussion, not about the fact that this national team won a World Cup. It was about a terrible incident, a non-consensual incident between Jenny Hermoso and the former Spain Federation president, Luis Rubiales. There was a lot of discussion about that. And since things have gone to trial, even more highlights about that. And Tomé taking over this team came with a lot of controversy in the time because of her coming up through former head coach and on the sideline in the staff with Vidal. So there was maybe some mixed reaction to her arrival, I think, to that post. And there might even be some more mixed reaction as she leaves this post, honestly, because when we're looking a little bit at the fact that she's out and Bermúdez is in, it kind of feels a little bit of more of the same. And please, as former players who have played at the international level, correct me if I'm wrong. I think, Jen, if you'd like to kick us off here, because you were so locked into those Euros. I mean, you were on calls. We were cheering you from home on the TV, like doing all the analysis. Does this feel a little unexpected for the Federation to make this move?
I mean, I think I read that her contract was about to expire anyway at the end of August. So I think the fact that there hadn't been a renewal, even, you normally see that before a tournament to kind of invest in a manager, or definitely afterwards, soon afterwards as well, going down to the wire. So I think it was maybe expected. I think a lot of the girls maybe even had a hint of what was about to happen. I think the winning the Euros might have changed something. You can't, of course, like getting to the final and the football they were playing, they're one of the best teams in the world, right? They have Ballon d'Or winners in the midfield. The majority of their team got to the best 11 of Euros, but ultimately they fell at the final hurdle. So they'd off the back of winning the World Cup, they wanted to go that step further. It was their first ever Euro final. I think that's important to say. This is a very new generation of a successful Spanish team, with Germany having dominated Europe for so long. And of course, England winning in 2022. But I don't think it was a surprise, in a sense that I think the expectation of this Spanish national team now is to win. And I think that a lot of journalists and viewers went into that tournament calling them the favourites, and they ultimately were for a large majority of the time. But I think my biggest surprise is who they've employed. I think Sonia Bermúdez coming into it, a lot of international structures still do that, employ from within and promote from within. But ultimately, the biggest concern on the outsider's perspective looking into the Spain national team has been culture. With a lot of things that have happened in the past, you described it all there, so I don't need to repeat with Rubiales. But that's what I think I'm most surprised at. I was very intrigued to see, right, who they're going to bring in, what they're going to change of this culture, because that was always the big thing about Tomé is, okay, she was there when everything happened, and that's who took over. So what can they change now to make a really big impact? And they've employed from within. And I think from a player's perspective, Satara, would love to know what you think about this. I don't think the players would have a super positive mindset of, okay, that's a pretty straightforward employing from within. We talk a lot about thorough processes when it comes to recruitment.
Yes.
Have you looked everywhere? Have you gone global in terms of a process? Because you're talking about top players. You want them to have the best. And I think they've not, it feels like a quick decision. That's what I guess I wanted to say.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to jump on that, Jen, and I could not agree more. I think it's a sort of negligence, isn't it? Because from what I've read, I think the new director on board, her plan was to kind of kind of strip the whole culture down with Spain and kind of rebuild it, right? So I think that comes from kind of removing all of the toxicity that was once under Rubiales, and kind of bringing in something completely new. Now, Bermúdez, is that her name? On bringing her on board, to me, it's like laziness, because you're not really doing your due diligence and vetting these managers and really seeing, what kind of positive culture they can bring into this team. And that has been obviously the thing circling around Spain since the World Cup, is the culture of the team, the dynamic. And I just think Jen hits on so many great points, because as a player, you want to know that your federation actually cares about the well-being of players, and knowing that they're doing their diligence in bringing somebody on board that can really, bring a positive dynamic, a positive culture into the team. And it's like they're rotating. It's like a recycling of the same managers. And I just think it's laziness. I think there needs to be a deeper vetting on these managers, not just recycling the same people over and over and over again. I mean, it's insanity to me, and the players deserve more. They deserve better. And I think, Jen, you hit on such a great point, where now the expectations of Spain, of these women, are to win, right? Win these major tournaments. And in order to do that, it does start from the managerial position. And I think there'll be maybe a lack of trust, because it's showing that their federation, it's not really looking into actually doing, it's a disservice to them, I think. It takes nothing to go out and look for managers that actually are wanting to bring in something positive into this environment. So I'm shocked about it. Not in terms of of Tomé, leaving. It's who they're bringing in. I thought they had learned, obviously not. So it's a disservice to these women, honestly.
I think for me, that's the most glaring part of the change, is that it just sort of feels like this is inevitably going to lead to potentially more of the same, and a little bit of the opposite of what players have been vocal about for the last 2, 3, going on 4 years now. It was just before that 23 World Cup where 15 of their rostered national team players spoke out or tried to get a change internally, and take care of things behind the scene, and they were put on blast by their federation. Right. Okay, and then only to go out and then win the World Cup, and then have controversy follow them out of that victory. And so I am curious, for me, if that's just kind of what this signals. Does it signal that it's more of just of the same? Because players since that 23 World Cup have been vocal about that, still saying nothing's changed. Right. We're still not being heard. And yet these players are going out there and performing and performing and performing. They're winning games. They're competing, in later stages of major international tournaments, whether it was during the Olympics or now going to the finals in the Euro Championship and getting runner-up. And for me, that's the biggest part. And you can maybe look at different angles in this one and say, well, her contract was going to be up. This was always going to be the move. To me, that's a worse take. Yeah. You're going to tell me that this was planned, that Bermúdez was always going to be the move? That just seems like it just piles it on a little bit more, if that was really the line of thinking. I also saw additional reporting out of BBC that maybe, yes, there was a combination of the fact that Montse Tomé, yes, the contract was going to be up post Euros, but also maybe there was a little bit of culture that was either lost and or not reestablished, and so it was just best to move on. So as far as spinning this forward and looking ahead, Bermúdez has been given the reins. This is the head coach. It's not like they're gonna. This is the Spain Federation we're talking about. It's not like they're gonna take a look at what people are chattering about online and clamoring for, or even listening to us on A3 and say, "Hey, we really got to make a change here." This is who it is moving forward, and it's late summer 2025. The next thing in front of them, to your point, Jen, is that 27 World Cup. Yeah. We're like 20-ish. 1-2 months out from that actual World Cup. And I think this is where we maybe end on a little bit, because you both as former internationals, and that goal is to make that World Cup and eventually win it. Mm-hmm. Satara, maybe why don't you take the lead on this one? What's it like knowing that you have maybe arguably a short window to the most high profile tournament in anyone's career, combined with the fact that, okay, now we have to combine that short window with a coaching change?
Yeah, I mean, and obviously all these women for Spain, you know, professional at the highest level. And I think for them, perhaps they'll understand that, okay, this is something that it's not going to change right here between now and, you know, when the World Cup is happening, who knows? But I think the focus is just to focus on getting to the World Cup. And I think I think these women have already dealt with so much adversity, you know, throughout the last 2.5, 3 years, 4 years. To them, this is probably nothing different. And though they may be extremely disappointed about, you know, this hiring and disappointment of Bermudez, I think for them, they may put it aside and just focus on the job at hand. I think that's the thing about being an athlete. Like, you can deal with so much, you know, coming at you all at once. But when it comes time to going out there and getting a job done, that stuff gets put to the side for 90 plus minutes. And I feel like I would like to think that these women will do that. But it's something that has to be addressed at some point. You know, you cannot continue to keep recycling these same managers over and over and over again. I just think, you know, seeing how bad it was at one point and then you're not going to do anything about it. It's so poor, you know, but I think with how good these players are, how professional they are, how switched on they are all the time. I like to think that if I was in that boat, I would just kind of put that aside because there's nothing that they can do. Control the controllables and focus on the job at hand and let everything else kind of take care of itself when it needs to. But it's a disservice to them. And I'm going to continue to keep saying that. It's just poor, honestly.
I think it's still like going to the timing of it. I actually think it's still quite a good window of time. You know, from a player's perspective, I've definitely been there where managers change over mid qualifications or you know, or you've seen it. Christian Buch took over Germany, I think a little over a year before the Euros. So that's even less time. And I've definitely seen shorter windows. So I think a 2-year window, I think is still a good amount of time to implement what you want to do and how you want to, especially someone who's within the structure already, right? They know the philosophy inside out. They'll have coached a lot of these players, so it's a very smooth transition in that sense. So there are positives. Still would love to know what the actual players feel about it, but in terms of timing and window, I actually think it's quite a good time because it's straight after a tournament. They'll have had the heartbreak of losing a final. Now is the time to refresh, to get someone else in. So there are positives I can take at it in terms of timing and why now, because now you've got every single qualification going into that major tournament for her to implement what she wants to do, what she wants to change culturally, if she chooses to do that. We'll see, obviously, in terms of performances and press conferences and see what the players have to say about it. Of course, they'll be very careful with what they're saying and it'll be hard to figure out in that sense. But time-wise, definitely seen it being a lot worse from a player perspective and had that mid qualification. And that is the worst when you're trying to change things in a 10-day window. There's not a lot of time and you've got, you know, she's going to have friendly, she's going to have camp, she's going to have warm-up camp, she's going to have all the time to kind of figure out what she wants to do. So in that respect, there are still some positives, but I totally get what you're saying, Satara, like in terms of the service. I'm hearing you all the way.
Okay. I've got one rapid fire question for the two of you before we jump into our next segment. And it's this. All things considered, I love both of your points about the player perspective, having to go through that, even the timing, like, hey, the 2-year window is still a good build up. Mm-hmm. So let's fast forward. Spain are in the World Cup with Bermudez. Let's just say they get to that final. Let's say they lose that final. Unlike this window leading up to this World Cup, the next international cycle doesn't operate that way. The Olympics are right around. A, do they keep Bermudez even if they lose that final to go on to, you know, eventually the Olympics maybe? Or is it just more of the same from this federation?
I say give the same energy, isn't it? Like, I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, if that was the case, right? That theoretical scenario, like, I think I don't know. I do think that they may very well do the same thing again. But what I'm hoping, and this is me like wishful thinking, that this time, if that does actually happen, they'll kind of go outside of their norm. That's the hope. But that's just wishful thinking. So Jen, I don't know what you think about it, but I can just see them doing the same exact thing, honestly.
Yeah, same. I think based on the standard and expectations they've set, I think it would be an actual disservice to Tomé if Bermudez got to keep in the job based on losing another final. So no, I don't think timeline is maybe what they're thinking. Success is everything in sport.
Yeah.
If you win a trophy, you're safe. If you don't, and you have those kind of players in the locker room, I think we'd see the same, even if it is only a year window. Good question though, Sandra. I like that.
Really good question.